I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. Joining me once again is Patrick Wyman, and as we teased you on last week's episode, we are joined by an interview that both Pat and I are very, very excited to conduct. The best color commentator in the business, Brian Stann, is joining us. Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the compliment. I'm glad that that's your opinion. There are certainly plenty of people on Twitter who may disagree with you, but I will definitely take the compliment if you're willing to give it.
I think you'll find that the vast majority of people in this community would agree with me. I think we have taken we probably come close to taking the kind of knowledge you bring to the booth for granted. There's not a lot of color commentators in MMA right now who are breaking things down and giving the kind of strategic depth into it that you do. So we do appreciate it. It's a lot of fun to listen to.
Now, I love doing it, and I apologize. I just heard some hammering. There's some work being done in our Higher Heroes USA headquarters here. So I'll apologize to the folks at home if you hear any loud noises. We're just making room for some more staff, so I apologize.
They're already more than used to hearing Pat's dog in the background and all kinds of
The listeners of Heavy Hands are used to distractions. It's one of their finer qualities, I'd say.
It's what makes podcasts cool, though. It humanizes it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The sloppiness is what makes it cool. So, Brian, first thing I wanted to talk about is you're a guy with a lot of experience both in life and in combat sports. You've been a fighter, you've been an analyst, and we'll talk a little more about that as the show goes on. But we were kind of interested to know, knowing what you know now, given all that experience, both an analyst as a competitor, what are the lessons that you would try to convey to young fighters? You've got a sort of fatherly vibe to you, Brian. So if you were bringing up mentoring a young fighter, what kind of advice would you give them?
You know, it's interesting you say that. That's one of the things I love most about calling fights is I get to interact with a lot of these young fighters and have those exact conversations, because there is a lot that I would do differently. One, the first advice I give them is training. And this sport, traditionally and historically, we massively overtrain, and I'm very guilty of it. You know, I think my career could have gone on 5 years longer than it did had I trained less, had I done more drilling than some of the hard rounds that I did, had I taken more breaks in between fights from the harder training to give my body a break and focused more on flexibility and dexterity. So, and then obviously with the sparring, you know, we do a lot of heavy sparring in mixed martial arts. And as a fighter, you can't really think, once you start thinking about longevity, once you start to think about brain damage, it could be a problem. You get less aggressive and you start to think about the things you have to lose. It makes you a lesser fighter because you have to be almost fearless with your body. But we take risks. I mean, we literally leave our chins in the gym often in this sport. And there's so many hard rounds that we're not getting paid for where we're crushing each other. And people don't realize that hits to the head are cumulative. And once your chin is gone, it's gone. There's no reviving it. There's no taking time off and it heals. And obviously the long-term effects of head damage are traumatic and they're very problematic when you see the parts of the brain it affects. So that's the first thing would really be the training. The second advice I would give them is they have to understand this is a business and that things that aren't fair happen in business all the time. You guys probably see it. People get promoted. They've only been with the company for 4 months. You cannot, as a fighter, focus on what everybody else gets. You have to focus on yourself. And how can you turn your brand into a brand that sells tickets and promotes your fight so that you can make the most money you can? And so if you're training properly and you're promoting yourself properly, then when you look at the entire timeline of your career, you're giving yourself an opportunity to maximize the profit because you're doing this for money. So you want to make as much as you can for as long as you can and then get out of the sport. And I don't think a lot of fighters look at it and look at themselves like a business. And that is something that they have to look at. And, when they all want that money, well, hey, how come, Sage Northcutt's getting paid this and this guy's getting paid that? Look, if you're selling tickets and you're moving the needle, you're going to make money. And you've got to get yourself in a position to do that. And it's not always easy. And you don't have to take Conor McGregor's route. You can still be yourself. He's being himself, but you got to find your way of doing that. And it's not always simple. And then the other part of it would be to remind them that the people around them work for them. Too often we fall in line, and what our managers, we almost act like our managers we work for them, and we have to please our managers. And that stems from when you're a young fighter, you just want somebody to manage you, and these managers interview you and decide whether they're going to take you on or not. And so it establishes this relationship where a lot of fighters feel like they work for their managers, which is not the case. Mm-hmm. And it will cloud your vision when you realize whether this person has your best interest in mind or they're really working hard for you. And then the same with your coaches. We get loyal almost to a fault with some of our coaches, and then later on in our career, we lose all loyalty. We bounce all around searching for answers. So fighters have to take a more intelligent approach and always keep themselves in a training environment where they have new information flowing, and they will get the personal attention to all of their training so that it's integrated so that they can be the best they can be on fight night, and at the same time make sure that their management is legitimately working for them.
And that thing about the trainers is specifically a difficult one, because you see problems on it going in both directions. Some fighters are loyal to a fault, as you said, where they never leave the trainer that they started with, and it hinders their development as they try to improve and as they face tougher and tougher challenges. Other fighters, and we see this probably more in boxing than in MMA, but I have no doubt it's coming to the MMA world, other fighters will hop around from one celebrity trainer to the next, trying to find the thing that's going to fix their problems without them necessarily having to look inward and fix them themselves. So how do you manage that kind of difficulty? How do you determine whether it's best for a fighter to stick with his trainer and show loyalty, or to move on and find something that will help him grow?
They have to take time to sit down and ask themselves the hard questions. Bring in people in their life who they really trust and appreciate, that aren't their coaches and management, and have them go through that process with them. Am I getting better? Look at their last 2 or 3 fights. Am I improving? And do my coaches have new information to tell me? I'll use myself as an example. Am I training with the best guys, for me to really learn how to function on the ground in an MMA environment? Or am I training with guys that are training me to be a jiu-jitsu competitor? And that was an evaluation process I had to go throughout my career, because obviously I took quicker to the striking aspect of the game just due to my natural power than I did in the ground game. So then the answer was, well, let's go find a good Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach. And so I would go do that, but then you have to ask yourself, is everything I'm learning right now applicable to what I'm getting paid to do on a Saturday night? And so I think fighters need to really evaluate that. Am I getting better? And just as important, are the people around me in the gym, are they helping me to arrive in the best mental state to my fight? Because, if there's anything I notice now, confidence is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And you also need to be focused and confident when you show up. And so those 2 things, they're tough questions to answer. And, there are some coaches out there that are very humble and realize they don't have all the answers. And so they welcome other people to come in, work with their guys, knowing that, hey, I'm the one who delivers this person in the right mental state to fight. So they're still going to be my guy, but I've got to get them different perspectives, new little tricks to put in their tool bag to accomplish this. And it's hard. It's not easy for most fighters to go through those honest conversations and admit their shortcomings, and have to look a beloved coach in the eye and say, look, I have to go train here because I know what you know already. There's nothing new you're going to tell me. And doing the same thing every fight, I'm not winning. I'm stale. People have figured me out. I've got to go add some new wrinkles to my game.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because it seems like it's possible to be at an elite camp where you're surrounded by excellent training partners, where you're not necessarily getting better, and conversely, it's possible to be at a smaller camp that with more individualized training that works better for you? It depends. It seems to depend a lot on the stage of a fighter's career. Like, would you say at the beginning it's more important to be in an environment where you're surrounded by other professionals so you can kind of learn the ropes and learn how that goes, and then as time goes on you can customize yourself more?
It's interesting. I would say for the most part, that is, for most guys, that's going to be the best route. But then there's a lot of factors that people don't see. You go into these major gyms and there's guys that have been there their whole career, surrounded by great fighters and great knowledge. And because who they are as a person, nobody ever really valued them. Nobody took the time to invest in them. There were 10 to 15 sparring partners when I went to Jackson's. Local guys that walked in, walked out, never really took themselves that serious, so nobody else really took them that serious, and they never grew. They never got past the local arena, where I was able to go in and establish some key relationships with guys there where, there were too many fighters there for me to always have individual eyes from Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn on me. Part of my growth in the early stages of my career was due to them, but then it was also due to guys like Rashad Evans and Keith Jardine, Joey Villasenor, taking the time after different rounds saying, look, I'm always passing your guard this way, or I keep hitting you with this because this is the tendency I'm noticing. Then I can take that tendency, go back to my coaches and say, hey, look, I'm getting clipped with this all the time. What do you suggest? I can go back and watch film and see how other guys overcame that. And so it's really important that they find an environment that has all that knowledge and everything. But if you walk into an ATT or an AKA and you don't gel with the guys and you're not part of that in club, you could be surrounded by greatness and never grow yourself because you're just not really a fit there. You've got to be assertive. Some of the guys that fail despite being surrounded by greatness, that's back on them. Ultimately, we as fighters, we are our own business. We are ultimately responsible for how we perform in the octagon. We can't give ourselves. I hate when I talk to fighters, say, whatever my coaches tell me. I give myself to my coaches. Look, that's a recipe for disaster. You've got to be in charge. You have to have your pedal to the metal because the only one who cares as much as you do about yourself is you. That's it. Nobody else does. They've got lots of different fighters. And so while I agree, I think it is best to be in a larger environment surrounded with lots of new knowledge and good people. At the same time, you got to be careful you don't just become a sparring partner and take a lot of damage in the gym. And then there is a time where when you get to a certain degree and you're a top 15 guy, your training camps really need to be a lot about you. And every round you're doing needs to be someone mimicking your opponent. Every drill you do needs to be tailored towards the guy that you're going to fight and your own personal weaknesses to improve you overall as a mixed martial artist. And if that's not happening, that's a problem. And I've been through that too, where I would do 5-6 rounds a day for a 3-round fight, which is a mistake, by the way. But additionally, only half of those rounds I have someone mimicking a Chael Sonnen for me. The other rounds, I've got someone who's not pressing me, not shooting on me. Those are useless rounds if you're fighting a guy like Chael Sonnen. And that type of thing happens when you're in those bigger gyms. Winklejohn and Greg, they can't see every single round. They can't decide who's going to spar with who for every single guy in the gym when they've got, a Jon Jones, a Carlos Condit, when they have all those guys in there that they're also monitoring. That's on me to make sure that I'm getting all of those things. You have to take ownership of it. And it may not always be there.
That's the Prussian point. We actually talked about training camps and training environments on last week's episode, so that's very relevant to what we've been thinking about lately. And related to that question, earlier you mentioned advising fighters to kind of navigate this environment that is defined by brash personas like Conor McGregor, Chael Sonnen, even someone like Ronda Rousey, who seems more of a hero to some than a villain like the others, is still very much an out-there personality, a loud personality. And it can be difficult for fighters to not have that be their style of personality, not have that be their natural persona, and yet still find a way to define themselves. And even more so in an environment in a sport that is so team-based, when everyone is all about loyalty and working together and not fighting teammates, that kind of thing. So how do you advise a fighter in a more personal level to make himself memorable despite not feeling comfortable being a Conor McGregor?
Open up. You have got to give access to the people like you who write about this sport. You get so many guys. Look at Jose Aldo. I hates doing media, hates the week of the fight, doesn't like all the stuff that goes with it. But he's so phenomenal that it doesn't matter. He was able to overcome it, went undefeated for a decade, right? but that's not the way to go about your business.
And he still was
You know,
never a star in the U.S. at least.
yeah, exactly. You know, what I mean, you've got to give access. I don't care what the podcast is, what the interview is, give it and open up and tell people about yourself. I talk to fighters all the time, and you know, that when they want to give me really short answers, I say, listen, you know, my job as a commentator is to tell the world about you. And so for all the people that are at home that come from a small town like you do, or, you know, have come from this adverse condition like you, they're going to remember your name and they're going to want to watch you and follow your career. But I can't tell them all those things unless you tell me. And so they have to give access. They can't just say, I just want to fight. Because then, unless your fights are all like Matt Brown's, just to give an example, then people aren't going to remember you. And that doesn't always work either, because guys who fight like, you know, Eric Silva's a great example. You know, sometimes they tend to fizzle out. You can't do that each and every time. You're not always going to have an incredibly exciting fight. So you need to give the media access and open up. Let the mixed martial arts world know who you are, what your quirky interests are, and show your own personality. Don't make up a persona, and that will help. That will get you a following. Engage those fans on social media. Engage them in opportunities when you can go to places and do seminars and spread your brand. Just like any business has to market, you got to do that. You as a fighter are your own business. And that doesn't mean you have to sell your soul to sell yourself. You're just being you, but you're giving fans access to you, and they'll appreciate that. And that will allow you to maximize this opportunity, because this sport is so hard, and so few fighters who fight for a long time make legitimate money that they can live off for the rest of their life. There are many that can, at least when they retire, hey, look, they've got a house paid off, they've got money put away, they're in a good financial position to move on to their next career. And that's what these fighters need to focus on if they ever want to get to the point where they're going to make the 70 and 70s, the 80 and 80s, and have that kind of income coming in where they can legitimately take, hey, this is what I made from this fight, this is how much I'm putting away and investing, this is how much to pay my bills for the next 3 months until I fight again. You're just not going to get to that level unless you've taken the time to build yourself. I hear so many fighters say, well, the UFC doesn't promote me, the UFC doesn't promote me. Stop counting on other people to do things for you. You're going to have to do it yourself. You and your team and your management have to come up with a plan, take ownership of it, because it's just like in the regular world, right? How many people out there think they're a victim of something? Well, this company never promotes me, and they've got that negative attitude. It happens everywhere. The only person who cares as much as you do about yourself is you, you know? And so I think it's smart for these fighters to really take ownership of their career and don't be afraid to open up. They may think they're boring, or they may think they're this or that. I mean, I got called boring my entire career. But I used the media throughout my career to help build the nonprofit I run today. I mean, we got massive amounts of free media. We had no marketing department. We didn't spend any money on marketing, but I fought on Memorial Day and got a ton of media because of it. The UFC didn't decide to fight me on Memorial Day. I asked them to fight on Memorial Day because I'm pissed off anyways and I want to fight somebody. But because I knew I could leverage a lot of great media for this mission I have over here, trying to help these other service members transition back into society and be happy and be successful.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because we in the media are looking for stories. We're looking for narratives. And so if fighters can start to place themselves at the center of narratives, that's it, like, that's what that's all about right there. And it's not a coincidence that you mentioned Jose Aldo earlier, that people started to get more interested in Jose Aldo as he started to talk more. It turned out Jose Aldo had some really interesting things to say. He had some interesting things on his mind. But for years, because he wouldn't give anybody access, it was impossible to tell exactly what was going on in his head, and that there might be things in there that people would find compelling outside of just his performances.
I agree 100%. I agree. You guys enjoy telling their story. I think that they just, sometimes you get in these gyms and it's frowned upon. You know, oh man, be a fighter, be a fighter first, and that's great. Look, you are a fighter. Be secure, but at the same time, give that access. I mean, guys, just looking at this week's card, guys like Daniel Hooker and Mark Adiva. They've got really interesting stories themselves, just from, hey, how did you get to where you are in MMA? Who did you find to coach you? You guys come from obscure places to try and learn this sport and fight at the highest level. And they also are very exciting fighters. What inside of you makes you fight like this? What makes you like these slugfests and these grinding, these fun style of fights? Fans love that stuff. They just don't realize it sometimes. And the opportunities are there. And when they open up and tell it, it gets people interested. And I think that, that's an area where a lot of fighters can continue to improve. But we're starting to see more of it. I think more fighters are starting to get it.
So we do, despite all of the sort of the white bread persona that's kind of pushed in a lot of fighters, and I think it's also just kind of, maybe not just an American, but definitely in America, it's very prevalent that people are told to be humble and not to, be braggadocious and put themselves out there too much. But despite that, we do have big personalities in this sport. And I think it's my personal belief that to be particularly good at something, no matter what it is, with very few exceptions, those who are the best in their fields tend to lose something else in terms of personality. They tend to be a little more brash than they should be. They tend to not know how to connect with other people. Maybe it's the environment that affects them. And having the emotional and physical demands of being a high-level mixed martial artist, there are a lot of difficult things to deal with. There are a lot of temptations. There are a lot of hurdles to overcome in personal life. We've seen that with Jon Jones. Conor McGregor's been in the rumor mill recently for similar things. So about a year ago, Brian, you were on the Joe Rogan Experience, and you had a quote that both Pat and I absolutely loved. And we were wondering, do you still feel that pussy is undefeated?
It is. It absolutely is. And I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, look, people always ask, like, when I go to these UFC events and things like that, people will go out, hey, you're going to come out? No. And sometimes, well, why not? Because I love my wife. And there's just, look, I mean, it's not that I can't say no or things like that. I mean, the key there is understanding human instincts and what our temptations are and not putting yourself in a position where trouble can happen. And it's not just women, but anything in general. I've noticed, me personally in my life, because I tend to be overly serious and because I'm ambitious, people really enjoy when I screw up. And when I tend to screw up, I tend to screw up massively. I don't just slip and fall and embarrass myself in front of people. I tend to really fall on my face and do something really dumb that I regret and I have to really apologize for. And so, trying to avoid those situations where you can stumble and fall. And I'll ask people, I used to ask my Marines this all the time, think about everything you've done in your life that you really, really regret. And I would bet you that 80 to 90% of those times you had alcohol or some kind of stimulant in your system. Mm. And a lot of times people's heads go up and down. And so you just have to be really selective when you want to let your hair down. The comfort of your own home, when you're around friends that you trust, that and I always even tell my employees, it's just not smart to go to a professional event and let your hair down. I mean, these are people that are constantly judging you and looking to do business with you or partner with you or develop a relationship with you. And those are just not the best times to where you can do something that then makes you susceptible to embarrassing yourself or doing something that you have to apologize for later. And with fighters, look, most fighters in the UFC are more famous than most of the guys I know in the NFL. We don't wear a helmet. We get a lot of individual attention. So when they go out in public, those are the last times that they really want to let their hair down. They have to be careful. And a lot of them can really run into mistakes and that those are things that can bring them down. And they just have to understand, what are the situations that can hurt my career and how do I avoid them? And it's not saying like, look, you don't have to be boring. You don't have to not have fun and live your life. But if you've chosen to do something that's very public and not private, therefore, when you want to let your hair down, live your life, do it when you're surrounded by people you trust and when you're in the comfort of a place like your own home or somewhere where the outside world can't exploit you. And I think it really helps. And, obviously that quote for me, a guy like me in my situation, I've got a wife, I've got 3 kids. You think, okay, what can cataclysmically go wrong for me in my life and cause me to make a big mistake? And it's going out with a bunch of people that I'm not really, really close friends with, I'm just familiar with. And, when you're around the mixed martial arts community, that's the only time we're famous, right? Where we get a lot of attention. And there could be a lot of temptation to do something. Oh, man, I deserve it. I work really hard. Let's have a great time tonight. And I'm just really careful about that because none of those good times are worth losing what I have in my wife or kids. You know, I mean, that's my world to me. And I'll never allow something to get between me and my family.
Go on, Pat.
So, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up that point. If you continuously put yourselves in those situations, no matter how good you are, eventually something bad is going to happen. Like you brought up Eric Silva earlier. Eric Silva got in a lot of slugfests, and his chin held up through most of them. Finally, it took one punch, and his chin was gone. I think, if you continuously put yourself in bad situations, you can be perfect 9 times out of 10, but eventually you're going to screw up. So why put yourself there in the first place?
I was going to say the same thing. If you view life outside the cage the same way you might view a fighting career, you fight enough good guys, you will lose. You put yourself at risk enough times, you're going to lose. And so if temptation, if sex, if giving in to the sort of competitiveness outside the cage as well as inside is a series of fights, that if you have enough of them, your chin will get tested.
Absolutely. And that all really coincides too with, we as human beings, we all like attention. As humble as we all want to be, and a lot of us won't admit it, we all enjoy attention. Everybody does. Everybody likes being complimented. And it's when it begins to define you that it becomes a problem. And for a lot of fighters that I talk to and say, hey, man, maybe it's time to hang them up. Maybe it's time to redirect and do something else. The biggest reason they don't want to is because they're afraid of being nothing. Fighting now defines them, and they love the attention they get for being a fighter. So they hang out in this sport too long, which, look, we all know that's dangerous. It's not a good thing to do, and we get addicted to that. And I've always tried to remind myself, and I have some great people in my day-to-day world that I do business with and that I'm close friends with, that remind me all the time that mixed martial arts does not define me. It's far from that. This is something I do, and it's something I absolutely love to do, and I think I'm fortunate to do. But at the same time, it can be taken from me at any moment. And at the same time, if I begin to allow it to define me, then I think I'll ruin a lot of the values and attributes that have allowed me to gain any success I've gained from it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian. If you don't mind, if you got a little more time for us, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'd love to delve into some of the more technical aspects, both behind fighting and training and calling fights. So we'll take a quick break. All right. We'll be back with Brian Stann right after this. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
So, Brian, you watch and you analyze more fights than just about anybody in the sport, both at the regional level and at the UFC level for debuting fighters and fighters who have fought before. Are there any overarching kind of trends that you see happening, whether they're percolating down from the highest levels or starting there?
Yeah, there are. Technically, I'm starting to see less and less stationary Muay Thai fighters. I think that people are starting to notice that, back when I first really got into the sport, the two main components that everybody directed you towards, hey, you got to do Muay Thai and you got to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And most of the Muay Thai training was more of your traditional stationary tapping the lead foot Muay Thai. And it makes you easy to angle around, makes you easier to get taken down. And guys are starting to really blend in a lot of different striking styles. I think there's still some really good bases that come from Muay Thai because it's such a practical art and it works so well. But they're adding in the footwork. They're adding in some of the more unpredictable traditional strikes. They're adding in more boxing principles. They're adding in more head movement. And I think that, even watching some of these regional fighters, they're harder to predict. They're harder to plan for. They're harder to take down, especially when they get their timing down in some of these spinning attacks. They're better at keeping distance. And I think it's due to two things. One, the sport's maturing. And the sports, or the coaches and the fighters are getting smarter. The other thing is the level of athleticism is going up. I'm a pretty good athlete. There are some of these striking techniques, some of the spinning techniques that these guys are doing now, I simply can't do. And if I try to do them, I can maybe do them and I can hit you hard with it. But I mean, you have to pull out a sundial by the time I spin around and get it to you. You know, it would be that predictable. And so I think those are two of the things I'm seeing. The other thing I'm seeing as well is, and this is particularly more at the higher level, not at the regional level. Fighters are starting to discover that confidence and psychology make a big difference in a fight. And regardless of what the odds say, if you go out there and you fight better than your opponent, who may be a better fighter than you, but you fight better than them in that moment, you can win. And we're starting to see a lot of upsets, and a lot of them are because the better fighter didn't fight so well. The lesser fighter was more confident and gutted it out and found that toughness is a major factor in mixed martial arts. And you know, when I do my analysis, and I hate making picks, by the way, I hate when I got to do these shows with the pick, because the reason I do is because fighters take it personal.
Yeah.
They take it personal, and I hate that. I am never invested in who's going to win a fight. I don't care. I want both of them to do great and improve, make money, and be successful and be happy. I hate watching guys after they lose and their dreams are crushed. I always go up to them, put my arm around them, and remind them. You know, I was almost cut from the UFC, and a year later I'm top 10 in the world. Things can change so quickly if you're focused. But you know, when you analyze a fight, I look which guy has the most tools and what I believe to the best surroundings to give him the best chance to win this fight, and then that's who I'll pick. I don't necessarily look and read into, you know, is this the timing, or am I going to call an upset? You know, I'm just not that type of guy. You know, when I make my picks, I'm a little bit more analytical with them. But I'm starting to see now that a lot of guys, a lot of women are looking at it and saying, you know what, I am the underdog. This person is a little bit better than me. But if I go in there and I fight hard and focus on what I can do, I can still win this fight. And it's happening. We're seeing a lot of underdogs come out on top.
So, having picked up on those trends, I mean, it's quite obvious listening to your commentary, Brian, that you do a lot of preparation, you do a lot of tape study, and you even have a background in football. You played football back in the day, and there's a lot of tape studying going on in that sport as well. So we were kind of wondering, being analysts ourselves, when you sit down to study footage of some fighters, what are the sort of underlying principles that you rely on? What are the first things you look for? How do you efficiently get yourself to a point where you feel like you understand a fighter's game?
Certainly. So the first thing I'll look at is I'll see right away what jumps out at me as advantages, as weapons. You know, do they have good hand speed? Do they have good movement? Do they move their head? What are their instincts? Because any fighter can learn the same combinations and techniques. The ones that are more athletic and then also have the best instincts tend to really rise to the top. And so I'm looking at what's obvious first, and then I like to look at their growth. I like to go back and see, okay, what are they using a couple of years ago that they're still using today? And what has the growth been, so that I can then try to predict where they might be for this fight as well and see how they've improved. And some people, you'll notice that they haven't improved that much. And that sometimes will tell you about their mind and their ability to adjust in a tough fight, their ability to go to plan B or C. If they've not really shown that before, what's going to make them able to do it now in this fight? And then I'll start to look at what I see as repetitive weaknesses. You know, gosh, in every fight I'm watching, they have very limited head movement. There's a constant tell when they want to kick with this foot. They put themselves in a bad position here. And then from there, I'll start to look at psychological things. You know, they give up takedowns here, or they'll rest at certain points. I could see they're making an agreement right now with their opponent to rest here. They're not really good when they're tired. Things of that nature. And then I'll try and look at gym tendencies. You know, where do they train? And what are some of the common denominators amongst the team members at that gym? And so I'll start to put all of that together and I generally have about 5 seconds to talk about it during their fights, which stinks unless something comes up. They use one of those techniques, and then the other piece of it is obviously when I speak to them, and I'll ask them questions about it. I never try when I talk to fighters to be condescending at all. If I look at a weakness, because I'll tell fighters, look, you want to hear me be really condescending and critical, listen to me break myself down. But I do want to ask them about things. Hey, look, in this fight you had trouble with this. What's going to be different this fight? Or what have you done in this training camp to close the gap there? And I love getting their perspective. Why are you going to win this fight? And that's where I'll start. When I call fights, that's when I really know and have a feel for how a fight's going to go. When I do these desk shows and have to make these predictions, I don't have that kind of access to all of the men and women. But when I'm calling fights, I can quickly tell what kind of attitude they have at that moment, and if they're game and if they're really ready and focused. Now, all that being said, there are times where I've spoken to fighters and they are right where they need to be, and then 3 days later, it all falls apart. Crazy things happen in that locker room before they walk that tunnel and go to fight out there, and there's a lot of mental gymnastics that take place. But that all in all is typically how I'll go about it. And then really depending on the day of the fight, I'll wake up really early, I'll work out, and then I'll kind of look through my whole roster of everybody fighting on there, and I'll just do a gut check on each person if I really right then and there feel comfortable. If I were to do a 20-minute discussion on just that fighter, do I feel good about it? Do I feel like I have them? I have their style, their abilities, what they want to do, where they want to be, where they were, and how they've grown.
So that's a really cool, in-depth kind of process to take there, and it's interesting that you want to be able to go in-depth about any of them individually, and then you have to distill that down into the broadcasts. So, of the upcoming fights on the UFC docket, what are the ones that stand out to you the most? Which ones are you most interested in?
Well, I mean, for this weekend, I'm definitely interested in Lombard versus Magny. I want to see how Lombard comes back. Neal's an intriguing guy. I mean, just the height difference, the athletic difference there will be really interesting. And welterweight certainly has been waiting for Hector to come back. Is he going to be a title challenger? Johnny Case, he definitely interests me. And then obviously Jones Cormier. Jones Cormier too is going to be an intriguing matchup that I am interested to see how John returns. I know what I suspect how he's going to return. And can Daniel close the gap, as he's getting older? Another guy that's on my radar is Whitaker. Whitaker versus Rafael Natal. I think Robert Whitaker is a guy that a lot of middleweights are avoiding, that they don't want to fight. He's an undersized guy at middleweight, historically undersized, I would say. That doesn't mean he's actually undersized, who's capitalized on moving up a weight class and doing really well. Demetrius Johnson versus Henry Cejudo stands out to me a lot. DJ's been so dominant. I think a lot of people expect him to really cruise in that fight, but we can't forget that Henry Cejudo rose to the occasion massively when he won the Olympics. That was not supposed to happen. So this is a guy who does his best. When I've talked to the people that were around him during that, this is a guy who shines brightest under the brightest lights, and his diet and his process before the fight are pretty atrocious. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and I'm pretty sure he's locked in and going to do that before this fight. So that could be interesting, and we'll see what he has to offer DJ in rounds 4 and 5 if he's still there. And if he can bring that level of athleticism and that speed into rounds 4 and 5, we may see Demetrius tested.
So about Jones Cormier, I'm interested to know if I'm sure you've watched Cormier's fights since Jones was suspended. You've seen all of probably the fights since his last fight with Jones. Is there anything that you've seen in those matchups that gives you the impression, obviously not knowing where Jones is at right now, is there anything you've seen in those matchups that gives you the impression that Cormier may be able to implement that game plan more effectively against Jones the second time around?
Well, I think more psychologically, in the Gustafsson fight, Daniel had to dig really deep there.
Yeah.
And his wrestling was failing him, and he had to get inside on a guy who's an excellent striker, and he had to find a way to win. Daniel's an excellent competitor and a very underrated athlete. I've trained with him personally. You don't become an Olympian. You don't get to where Daniel's got. I mean, this is a guy who turned down a full ride to LSU to play football to go wrestling. He's a massive athlete. So I see mentally what he needs, because in rounds 2 and 3 against Jones, he was getting inside, he was striking, and I thought he was turning the momentum of that fight. But he took a round off in round 4, and that was the main difference. You can't do that with Jon. Mm-hmm. And so I saw something mentally that Cormier needs. I don't know. I haven't seen anything technically that leads me to believe that he's going to be able to take Jon down consistently in that fight. And especially now that Jon has discovered weightlifting, which he's never really discovered before. He would do it during his fight camps, but in between, he did nothing. Literally, fight's over. However long he doesn't fight, he is doing nothing. Now, he has built a lot onto that frame.
I know he was just doing community service, but you could say Jon Jones kind of got prison strong. In his downtime, yeah. He seemed to have really dedicated himself to that physical exercise.
Yeah, I mean, Jon's a unique athlete. I mean, never having lifted weights, but then you try and get your hands on him, and he has his instincts in terms of leverage and in wrestling are phenomenal. I've watched him train with heavyweights and make them look really, really bad. If he wanted to move up to heavyweight right now and be the heavyweight champion of the world, I would say he'd have very good chances of doing so. But all that being said, I played catch with a football with him once, and it was embarrassing.
I've seen him try to dunk a basketball.
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. But you put gloves on him, you put him in an octagon, and he just gets it. I remember training with him, and I submitted him with a triangle. And he knew nothing about jiu-jitsu. This is when he was first getting started. And 3 weeks later, we were in Denver, and we're grappling right in front of Greg Jackson, and he submits me with a triangle. And I look at Greg, and hey, Greg, did he just learn jiu-jitsu in the last 3 weeks? And Greg looked at me, and it was just that look of like, look, dude, you and I both know what this guy's capable of. It was so frustrating as someone who worked so hard and was so diligent about the process to see this guy who it just makes sense to. It just comes to him.
Cheat codes.
So it's going to be a lot of fun, but where is Jon mentally? In my experience, making him mad isn't necessarily a good thing, but DC is by far a better athletic competitor than I've ever even dreamed of being in my life. So I got to think he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brian. Really appreciate your time. We're looking forward to hearing all of your excellent calls in the future, working with the other best man in the business, Jon Anik. It's always a pleasure. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again soon sometime.
Definitely, guys. I love the work you guys do. I'm a fan, always checking it out. Thank you so much for taking a good, diligent eye and promoting the fighters. I think that's my favorite part of calling fights. It's about them. It has nothing to do with me. I want to be prepared because I want to do them. I want to give them the proper service that they deserve, and you guys do that when you look at their styles and break them down. So, thank you for having me on, guys. Best of luck, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely, thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Brian.
All right, so in just a minute, we will be back to discuss UFC Brisbane, which took place last weekend, and a few of your questions from the Heavy Bag. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Well, Pat, how about that interview with Mr. Brian Stann?
Oh, that was awesome. Awesome. Pleasure talking to Brian Stann. Would talk to him all the time about MMA if we could.
Do you think, I imagine you and I both have a lot of adoration for Brian and admiration. Do you think we are in need of a father figure? And is Brian Stann that father?
Well, I don't think it hurts to collect avuncular figures like that.
Avuncular,
but Yeah, but I just think in general, like, it's hard to overstate how good Brian is at what he does and how much work he puts into what he does. Into what he does. Like, I don't know if you caught this after the fights on Saturday, Connor, but the desk team of Stann and Hardy raising the bar, incredible. Incredible job.
Yeah, Stann, Hardy, Cormier, Cruz. Bisping, all those guys, I think, even Bisping with his like ridiculous gaffes and things, like that's Bisping's character. You want somebody who's going to be a color commentator. You want a little color from their commentary. It doesn't really bother me in practice. He's a provocateur, Michael Bisping. And Brian Stann gets the color without the provocation, which you can only respect all the more. It makes him more likable, certainly. And I think the Fox Sports 1 team and the UFC with all of their new people has done a really good job of bringing in actual insightful fighters as analysts. You know, they're not like, okay, Matt Hughes, Chuck Liddell, you used to be fighters, get in there. You know what I mean? Like they've picked up on guys who actually have the ability to communicate.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I was tweeting about this pretty extensively after the fights on Saturday. That like it's not something that we talk about very much, but like the UFC and Fox Sports 1 have done an awesome job of that. And shout out to Fox Sports PR guy John Stauffer, who does a great job of making guys like Stann and Cruz available to analysts for interviews before fights too. So they have a strong stable of guys. They know that they want to use that strong stable of guys, and and so you know that's. We criticize so often. I think it only makes sense to give them them daps when they're deserved. Got to
give them the daps. And speaking of Fox Sports 1 analysis, we're going to do a little bit of a recap of UFC Brisbane. Maybe the commentary desk, as Brian Stann mentioned or suggested, is the next place for Frank Mir after that drubbing at the right hand of Mark Hunt.
Whew. Mir physically is just clearly not there anymore. Either his chin his ability to get himself in shape, and just the way that he moved when he was in the cage, he did not look good. But also skill wise, like it was clear he was just not anywhere close to Mark Hunt's level.
And I think Mir has long been a pretty underrated boxer. But I think he has, and I think offensively he's often been bad defensively. But his offensive boxing, I thought his defense has been a little improved lately. I just think it demonstrated the clear gap between what passes for good striking in heavyweight MMA and actual good striking. Because Mark Hunt has a lot of limitations to his game. He's not a super well-rounded striker or anything, especially as he gets older. But he is smart and crafty, and he understands things like timing and distance. And placement a lot better than most fighters in this division, pretty much than any fighters in this division do. Like Mark Hunt gets a lot of love for the power in his hands, but the way that he sets up and delivers his shots and the way that he avoids punishment while doing so really, really deserves credit.
Yeah, I think, and nothing made that clearer than the actual knockout shot. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because he noticed the way that Mir was reacting when Hunt threw. Right, and the way that Mir reacted by ducking down, whenever Hunt let
pulling
the right
back
hand
like
go.
A pull and a slip, yeah.
Yeah, and so Hunt just baited that, and then when Mir ducked and turned his head, he just put his right hand right on Mir's ear.
Yeah,
like it was a beautifully placed shot.
Beautiful timing. Not unlike the left hand with which Nate Diaz stunned Conor McGregor. The way he adjusted it to follow the head movement. He predicted where Mir's head was going to be. I particularly loved how Hunt set it up with a sort of a half-beat feint jab and then came in with another jab just to find his distance. So because he knew that Mir was going to be pulling away from him and that Mir was going to be moving his head, he made him move his head, covered the distance, and disguised it with another jab and felt his range, and then dropped the right hand down right where he expected his head to be. Turns out that's right where it was, and Frank Mir went away.
It's interesting, and it speaks to a certain evolution in Mark Hunt's game too. Even over the last few years, since he knocked out Czech Congo, we have become increasingly aware of the fact that Mark Hunt is in fact like an elite level MMA striker. But that doesn't mean that he's been static in that sense.
No.
He does different things now than he did 4 years ago when he knocked out Czech Congo. Like a few years ago, I don't know that he would have hit that half beat feinted jab. I think that it probably would have been a straight up jab.
Sure.
I think he feints more now. He does less work than he used to be. He's more efficient. He used to be, despite the fact that he was a short, the fact that he was a short guy and looks the way that he looks. Hunt actually used to throw quite a bit of volume. He's always been accurate, but he used to be a reasonably high volume.
A lot of
striker.
volume, a lot of kicks, surprising amount of high kicks and jump knees and stuff like that.
Well, but I mean, even in 2012, 2013 or so,
he
sure. Threw quite a bit. He even toned down the strike selection then, but he still used to throw quite a bit. Now he throws a lot less. He's a lot more patient. Yeah. But he does a much better job of placing his shots in intelligent ways.
Yeah, and I think Hunt he's losing a little bit of his speed. I think he's lost some of that ability to rapidly cover distance. I think he's probably lost a little bit of that athleticism, to use a vague term that we'll get in trouble for. But I think, what sets a guy like Hunt apart from a guy like Frank Mir, I think most notably, is the amount of, I don't know if it's maturity or discipline or how you might phrase it, but Mark Hunt is one of those guys who, when things start to change for him, he adapts. I think he recognizes the fact, having done this for so long, that he can't keep doing things the way he used to do them. He already changed that from his young kickboxing career to his later kickboxing career to his MMA career, little small adjustments, and now he has toned down the volume even more, changed up the way that he disguises his attacks so that he doesn't have to be so explosive to connect with them, changed up the amount of volume that he throws and how much he commits to certain shots, the amount of risks that he takes because he can't react as quickly. So he is maintaining his effectiveness and even becoming more effective in some ways, despite the fact that I do think he's losing a step, which is something that it's a process that it's sad that, being a fight fan, you have to watch your favorite fighters lose in crushing fashion. Like you pretty much, you resign yourself after a few cycles to knowing that all of your favorites are not just going to lose like athletes in other sports do, but they will seem to die in front of you because you will see everything that made them great go away. And so there are a few things more uplifting than seeing an old fighter who continues to find ways to remain relevant and stay competitive with his peers. And I think going into this fight, I acknowledged in my Sherdog preview that the one thing that set these two guys apart is that Frank Mir has never really known how to manage his energy the way that Mark Hunt does. Mark Hunt's always had a pretty keen grasp of how much energy he had, except for that Ben Rothwell fight. And even that one, he was the fresher guy at the end, and he kept going. And especially as he's grown as an MMA fighter. Whereas Frank Mir, could Frank Mir have done another 5 minutes even of the pace that he and Todd Duffy set? Almost certainly not.
I don't know if he could have done another 2 minutes.
Almost exactly. Almost certainly not. He threw dozens and dozens of strikes in like 2 minutes, a minute, something like that. Mark Hunt is not that guy. Even when fights are not going his way, you always still kind of have this sense that he could pull it out because he's still got something there. He's very. He's a patient, intelligent, crafty fighter. Frank Mir's like a gambit fighter. Like, he's crafty in the way that he knows how to finish a fight given one tiny opportunity. He's the heavyweight Ricardo Lamas, But Mark Hunt is like MMA's Larry Holmes. He is just with a lot more punching power. He is just very, very intelligent in what he does. MMA is George Foreman even, And MMA is comeback George Foreman. Way too old to be doing it, still doing it regardless.
Yeah. See, Mir was talking before that fight about how he thinks he could fight another 5 or even 10 years. Like, Mir is not that guy. Mark Hunt could definitely get another couple of years out of this.
Sure. Yeah, you definitely get that feeling. It's matchup dependent for him at this point. But and I don't ever like advising fighters. It's not my place to say, hey, retire. But I do make it known when I'm no longer interested in seeing someone fight. Frank Mir, I think, has reached that point where I'm not going to enjoy seeing him perform anymore,
Yeah, no dispute on that front for me.
Okay, so let's also talk about a couple other fights here before we get to some questions and wrap up. We've got Neil Magny, Hector Lombard. I feel pretty justified in this one, Pat, saying that I felt Lombard was a tough matchup going into this one. He had some real problem areas for Neil Magny. I also feel justified in saying, and I know you agreed with me on this, Neil Magny, not that good of a range striker, not as good as you think he is, given his build. Although, you think he looked better in that regard than he used to in this fight.
Yeah, I thought he did. I thought after he had his troubles in the first round, and barring that one just thunderous punch that Lombard landed in the second round, I thought Magny really looked pretty good on the feet. He made some defensive errors, but offensively, I thought he did a much better job of staying moving. of not standing directly in front of Hector Lombard. The problem is when you fight somebody like Lombard, who is so fast and hits so hard, and make no mistake, Hector Lombard is both really fast and hits really, really hard, and is well designed to take advantage of a relatively inexperienced striker like Neil Magny. Once you get past that, I thought Magny really did pretty well. And even before Lombard caught him with that big shot, Magny was on his bike, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that this was by far the best that Magny's ever looked against a guy who really was a very difficult stylistic matchup for him. And the fact that Magny was able to overcome those disadvantages, overcome the knockdowns, stay on it, and get back to it is, I don't know, I think it's impressive. I'm very excited to see what Magny can do in the future.
I think Neil Magny has a calm that I'm not sure can be taught to fighters. The poise that he keeps in fights. Because I had a strange feeling in this bout after that knockdown. Like, once it wasn't over in 5 seconds, and Magny was being shockingly crafty and constantly moving, constantly changing the way he was defending himself, constantly finding different ways to try and get back to his feet. Once that process began, even though Magny was still badly hurt and Lombard was still firing away, I kind of knew that Neil Magny was going to win. You know what I mean? He's just one of those guys where you know, and it's definitely not a great model to have to follow where you always get hurt early and then you come back. But Magny's that guy. He can come through difficult situations, and he is just so incredibly poised in a way. Like, in the end, Hector Lombard's attempt to finish Neil Magny had a far worse effect on Hector Lombard than it did Neil Magny. And that is not something that many fighters in that situation could say.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell there's a point. It comes at 3:55 of the first round after Lombard has knocked Magny down and he's rained down shots on him. Where Lombard has him pinned up against the fence, he takes a deep breath. He looks at the referee. He's right in front of his corner. He looks at his corner, and nothing happens. So he goes and he hits Magny. He hits Magny a couple more times. He looks at the ref again, and then you can tell, and he kind of tosses Magny back to the canvas when Magny tries to get back up. And that's the point where you can tell, like, oh, Magny's going to get through this. He's okay. Yeah. And you could tell at that point, too, that Lombard was going to be in trouble. Yeah,
he didn't. Again, energy management, I think, has been on my mind lately. But I think maybe it's not as well understood in MMA as it is in boxing. Boxing's got a couple centuries of history with fighters learning that they have to not punch themselves out. In MMA, I think we see a lot more guys really just throw it all away trying to get the finish. And as I think defensive technique improves and we have more veteran fighters who can understand how to take a beating when they have to, like Neil Magny is doing right now, that's you have to know when it's time to stop, and Hector Lombard did not. I would have thought maybe after 10 or 15 seconds, it should have become clear to him that, yeah, this guy's not getting out of here. I think he beat on him for like a minute.
Yeah, and he beats on him from about the 4:15 mark until about the 3-minute mark, and then he kind of settles into top position.
Yeah, and like all power shots too, like not even trying to, because you get someone on the ground, you can still try and set them up. You can try and manipulate their position. You can try and knock their head back in order to set them up for a hard shot. You can have your ground and pound equivalents of jabs and feints. But none of that. Hector Lombard was just a couple of vicious back-of-the-head shots, too. He wasn't shy about cheating. And Steve Percival, with his valiant performance as referee, or blood connoisseur in this case, certainly didn't mind that either. I don't think Lombard got one warning, despite about 5 or 6 pretty blatant hammer fists to the back of Magny's head. But Magny, I think all the credit there has to go to Magny, because even with all the fouls and everything, he survived the tough spot and came through and put on a really good performance.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm rewatching this right now, and like it's interesting. They get back. Magny finally gets back to his feet around 1:30. They get into the clinch, and after that, he dominates the judo Olympian in the clinch. He hit that slick jumping knee. He manages to work to a double collar tie, hits a slick jumping knee. Like after that point, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this fight is more. It's only a matter of time until either Lombard drops the second and the third round, or he gets finished.
You know what the crazy thing is? I think Hector Lombard may have very well beaten Neil Magny if he didn't hurt him in the first round.
If he didn't, I don't dispute that.
You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of Magny's success in the clinch had to come from the fact that Lombard was dead tired. After the first round, he was already exhausted and couldn't deal with him. And his defense went downhill from that because Lombard's not that bad a defensive fighter. He certainly keeps an active defense with his parries and his blocks. I think he would have been a lot more competitive and still had his chance to find some moments. But because he couldn't control himself when he hurt Magny, it ended up ruining the whole fight for him.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where I stand on this. I don't know. I think I think, but that's what made this such a difficult matchup for Neil Magny in the first place.
Right, exactly.
Is that he gets most of his work done in the clinch, and Lombard is a ridiculous clinch fighter.
Yeah.
Magny is very hittable, and if you get hit by Hector Lombard, especially backing up to the fence, you're in serious. You're in serious.
But in a weird way, that hitability ended up working to Neil's advantage in a way that I could not have foreseen, because Lombard could not resist. He couldn't. He had to go for the bait every time,
Well, at various points in his career, we've kind of thought that Lombard would figure that out, and he never really has. Like, he's shown flashes, like the Jake Shields fight, right? Lombard knew that he needed to pace himself, and so he mixed up a couple of big flurries with nice takedowns and kind of uneventful top control. Like, Lombard did nothing from the top when he fought Jake Shields, for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, he hit a couple of big hammer fists.
He pinned him mostly.
Yeah, but most of that fight was him sitting in Jake Shields' guard and just driving his hips forward.
Smart, which is very smart. It seems at this point that going forward, at 38 years old, having suffered a pretty devastating loss to Magny, that the Jake Shields win will probably be the high water mark of Hector Lombard's career.
Yeah, and that's still a real high water mark.
It's an amazing win. Beating Jake Shields is nothing to sneeze at. I contend once again, Jake Shields top 3 welterweight of all time. And up there as far as middleweights as well. Had a lot of great wins as a middleweight. Jake Shields is a weird fighter, but a damn tough out for anybody. And so at least Hector Lombard has that in his belt. Let's before we go on to questions, let's do one more to discuss. Why don't we do Jake Matthews versus Johnny Case?
What a fight that was.
Yeah, I went on. I was talking about this on Twitter. I'm like, ooh, Johnny Case, free money. Not as easy as I thought it would be. Johnny Case was a very, very, very slim favorite. At certain points, he was an underdog. He did feel competitive in this fight, and it was certainly close. But Jake Matthews, I think he has the distinct advantage of just being a very dogged fighter, and he showed that in the Akbar fight, the Akbar Areola fight that he had last time the UFC was in Australia, and this time as well. I think he also made some improvements, not in everything, and we'll discuss that in a moment, but I think he did improve in terms of volume and striking variety, and I think he improved in craft. I think he saw more things than he used to, where it really felt in the past like Jake Matthews was just kind of going through the motions of throwing a different selection of strikes, and once he threw one, he would say, okay, I've thrown strike 1A, now I will throw strike 1B. And I've thrown combination 1B, now I will throw combination 2C. Where he would just kind of cycle through and try a different thing each time and then run out of ideas. And that did not seem to be the case in this fight. He seemed to have become a little more experienced overnight, a little more savvy. And while his striking is still not perfect and his game is still not perfect, I thought he picked up very well on some of the openings that Case was giving him. Yeah,
I'm not as high as you on Matthews in the short term. I'm still very high on him in the long term.
Sure, yeah.
But I agree and disagree with some of that. So I think first and foremost, what this fight makes clear is what an unreal next level physical specimen Matthews is.
Right.
Like, he is really fast, and he is really strong, and he is really explosive, and he hits really hard. Like, we knew that he was a really good athlete. I don't think that we knew that he was this good an athlete before this fight, because Case is not like a slow guy, and Matthews made him look like he was standing still for long stretches of this fight.
Yeah, the problem with Matthews' speed is that I think like a lot of fast and athletic fighters, a lot of fast and athletic spiders, Anderson Silva, for example, Matthews tends to operate only at max speed.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue.
Which doesn't sound like a disadvantage, I think, to a lot of people, that, he's at the same level of incredible quickness all the time. But in fighting, I did a little experiment when I did my Gennady Golovkin video a while back. I had a video on Gennady Golovkin called Leading the Dance. I did a little experiment where I flashed an image of Gennady Golovkin throwing each of a 4-punch combination, 4 images. And no matter what the speed is, you can predict the 4th punch of that combination by the time it gets to the fourth punch. You know what I mean? Given a rhythm, even if it's really fast, 200 beats per minute or 100, you can predict that rhythm. Humans are very good at it. So the one of the trickiest things to figure out in fighting is when a fighter, one of the trickiest things to learn and one of the trickiest things for your opponent to figure out is in varying the speed of your punches or varying the tempo at which they come so that the person can't figure it out. And that sometimes means going slower than you think you should.
Yeah, absolutely. So baseball is the perfect example of this, right? Because you have a fastball and you have a changeup.
Sure.
When you throw a changeup, it makes your fastball look faster than it actually is because you go from one to the next. Then when you go from fast to slow, and then when you go back to fast, it's impossible for them to for them to time it.
And how are you going to shock someone with your speed once they get used to it?
Exactly. And so I think that this is an even clearer dynamic in fighting than it is in baseball. If you just throw heat all the time, eventually, no matter how fast it is, they will figure out the timing, and they will figure out your speed, and they will figure out your distance. And Matthews has the unfortunate tendency of combining the fact that everything comes at one speed with not having anything in the way of feinting or disguising or really much in the way of angles either. So pretty much everything he does comes directly in on a straight line. His head is right on the center line, and everything comes at the same speed. So Johnny Case, who's a really good counter striker, was able to tag him over and over and over again in the first 2 rounds.
And he got him with a lot of reactive takedowns as well. Both times that Matthews hurt Case with that body kick in the second round, he ended up being taken down pretty much right after.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when we're talking about my agreement and disagreement with what you said, I don't disagree with the fact that Matthews did look better in terms of his strike selection, in terms of his variety, everything like that. And I'm confident that he will get the other stuff over time. It's just he's 21 years old.
Yes.
So this isn't a huge criticism, but it's like he hasn't really dealt with the underlying issues.
Yeah, well, that's my thing. Is not that my point is not that Jake Matthews has suddenly become a complete veteran, but that he seems to have already learned in an experiential kind of way and improved as a fighter. He was throwing the same speed and everything, but he picked up on the fact that Case was reacting the same way and used, within the limitations of his all power, all speed, all the time style, he found ways to change things up regardless. So I think once he learns to contain himself and to have a little more craft to his striking, that he will be really dangerous indeed. I mean, once he picked up on the fact that Case was backing up away from his right hand the same way every time, he very quickly decided to put the left kick after that. And then once Case started to deal with that, he started to attack the body with the left hand off of the right hand. So he was being pretty clever with that kind of stuff. He doesn't have that sort of fluidity that comes with time. But I thought he was surprisingly clever with the way that he found his openings and the way that he exploited the tendencies of Johnny Case. So I thought that was pretty good.
He looked great He looked good on the feet. He looked great when he was on the ground. I actually think more so than his striking repertoire, what's going to be a real problem for him going forward is a lack of depth to his technical wrestling game.
Mm-hmm. It's like Sage Northcutt's wrestling.
Exactly. Yeah, that he's real strong, he's real fast, he's real explosive. Once he gets in on your hips, he's going to finish with authority, but he doesn't have a lot of setups. His defensive wrestling game doesn't have a lot of depth to it. Like there are real limits to what he can do in that phase, and I'm not sure if more so than his striking. I think you can learn great striking in Australia. More so than his striking, I think it's going to be hard for him to pick up those nuances and where he trains now.
Is Australia the new UK for MMA? Where you could just make lazy jokes about the quality of their wrestling. The UK, they have the boxing. Obviously, their striking's going to be good. Now they seem to be picking up the wrestling. In Australia, they've got the Muay Thai. Obviously, their striking's going to be good, but they don't like to wrestle that much.
Well, there's quite a bit of wrestling, but it's not at the highest quality. It's nowhere near the level that it's at in the U.S. or for that matter, like Japan, much less,
or Eastern Europe and various other places.
Yeah, so I mean, you can get really good judo in Australia, as far as I know.
That's true. Dan Kelly. We don't have time to discuss it, but just a shout out to old man strength Dan Kelly for making every MMA analyst on earth look like a fool.
I freaking love Dan Kelly.
He's amazing. He's awesome. He's the best. Yeah, absolutely.
He's still a pretty good athlete at 38.
He's shockingly good at this MMA thing, by the way. Yeah, he's way better than he should be.
And just dad bodding it up, too. Like, you can tell, off-season Dan Kelly, he's got a little bit of a beer belly going on.
Oh,
a little bit of a gut.
If only he were hairier, he'd make everyone on Earth feel better about themselves. Like
Well, he is. I think he is reasonably hairy, but you're telling me you can't tell me my man doesn't shave that.
you gotta show off the dad bod in its full glory.
Oh, for sure.
You gotta sculpt it. Okay, well, let's do a couple questions from our listeners, and then we'll wrap it up. Our first question, in fact, both of our questions today come to us from some of our Patreon subscribers. Pledge to Heavy Hands on Patreon, $5, or is it $5? Yeah, $5 or more. And you, I think I've been saying $5 to get thanked on air for the last several weeks. It's $3 to get thanked on air, I believe, and $5 to have a question answered. So I don't know what I'm doing. $5 or more, and you can get a question answered on the show, guaranteed. Our first question comes to us from Isaac Spooner, and Isaac asks, in Hendricks versus Thompson, we saw just how effective an aggressive outfighter can be. Besides Wonderboy, who are a few examples of other good aggressive outfighters, either current or retired, and what can other, perhaps more gun-shy outfighters do to maximize their skills in their preferred ranges? What do you say, Pat?
Well, this is a really good question. So
yeah, it is.
I think that it's not just aggressive outfighters. I think that we're also talking about active outfighters, guys who want to work at pace. So if we expand that definition a little bit, I think Michael Bisping is the best example that comes to mind. I think after that we have James Krause was a really active and really aggressive outfighter in his last bout. He looked great. I think Rory McDonald is a quintessential kind of aggressive and active outfighter. Mm-hmm. Who comes to mind for you, Connor?
Nate Diaz is the first guy that jumps to mind for me, especially after that Conor McGregor performance. I think, to me, it's not so much the aggression. It's a word that I've mentioned a few times in this segment, but I think it's discipline is really important for an outfighter. When we did our Styles Make Fight series, we sort of surmised, we came to the conclusion from outside observation that a lot of outfighters tend to have this idea that they want to have an advantage at all times, that they don't want to mix it up given the choice. They don't want to... they don't want to be in an equal exchange, if at all possible. They want to be on the higher ground. And discipline is, in the same way, like if you think about it like a military strategist, do you want to keep your unit of men from breaking? You drill them and you have them disciplined so that they do the right things at the right times, even when their instincts say not to, and that keeps the formation from breaking. And if you translate that to a single fighter's body, the formation breaking would be him getting knocked out or getting hurt or getting into a risky situation. And fighters sort of bow to their instincts a lot more than they should. I don't think it's so much aggressiveness as an issue, but like when we have Alexander Gustafsson and he turns his back and jogs away from Daniel Cormier, that is a bad habit. That is something that a more disciplined outfighter would not do. And Alexander Gustafsson obviously has been very effective despite having some of these habits, but it's not something that a really disciplined fighter should do. If you watch Nate Diaz reacting to a fighter getting into his space, he is 100% disciplined all the time. He's always doing the right things. He throws straight punches. He pulls his head out of range. He pivots. He makes a second defensive move always after making his first one if he feels the opponent is still going to be coming after him. If he moves away first, he'll smother after. If he smothers first, he'll get low and draw back. Always disciplined rather than just trying to get out of there in the quickest way possible. So fewer shortcuts, I think, is what makes a guy like Nate Diaz or a guy like Wonderboy Thompson so effective as an outfighter. It's just throwing the shots when it's best to throw them, not when you feel like you're safest to throw them. You have to fight against that urge sometimes.
Yeah, I just to build on that, because I think you hit on something really, really important there. This is a related point. Not trying to pick the perfect shot all the time, but just picking a good shot.
Yeah.
And because the difference when we're talking about guys like Stephen Thompson, guys like Rory McDonald, guys like Michael Bisping, guys like Nate Diaz, who produce a high volume of offense, which is a real problem for outfighters because they want to be at such a great distance all the time. You have to be willing to just throw sometimes, and not try and not for it to not be exactly the perfect shot at the perfect distance. Like this is a problem with like Anthony Pettis. right, has consistently been a problem for Anthony Pettis as a defined outfighter, that he always wants it to be the perfect shot. He wants it to be the kill shot when he throws, and that's how he's gotten outworked. It's how he's gotten outvolumed by a lot of guys that he's fought. Now, Wonder Boy is very precise and very accurate with the shots that he throws, but he's willing to just toss a scoring sidekick out there.
Oh, yeah.
Rory McDonald is willing to just score with his jab, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes he doesn't even need to go to the power shot.
Stephen Thompson does throwaway combinations all the time just to make you back up or to give him space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what do those do? Those give whether they're landing or not, they're giving the judges the impression that you're winning. Yeah. And this is a problem for a lot of outfighters.
Like Pettis versus Alvarez, where both you and I thought he won, but he certainly didn't try all that hard, didn't know how to try all that hard, perhaps, to give that impression. It's best to appear to be in control whenever possible. And, that was, again, like the issue in Seo Hee Ham versus Beck Rawlings last weekend. Rawlings spends the last 2 minutes of the third round leaning on Ham against the cage, doing almost nothing, but it gives the impression to two of the judges, which gave Rawlings all 3 rounds, that Seo Hee Ham did not want to be there, so therefore she was not controlling the fight, was not being effective. So it is what it is. Good question, Isaac. Thank you very much for pledging and for asking. Our next question comes to us from Gar, possibly a fish, possibly a shortened form of Gary, could be Gare. We'll never know for sure. Gar and or Gare asks, what are reasonable goals to aspire to for someone who has a fitness background but starts to train boxing or MMA in their early 30s? Is this, Pat, do you get the sense that Gar is asking this question about himself?
I think Gar may be asking this question about
I have a
himself.
friend who has a fitness background. It's one of those situations. I think people ask this kind of stuff a lot. People are very, very concerned with what their limitations are. For me personally, I think it's the kind of thing where you just shouldn't worry about it. Like, everyone, because the thing is the vast majority of people who start when they're 8 years old don't have any kind of success. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And don't stick with it, or don't. I think if you're cut out for it, you're cut out for it. There are more than enough stories of people who are late bloomers or late comers to boxing or MMA who've turned out surprisingly well. Steve Bosse just blew James Tahuna's doors off this last weekend, and he hasn't been doing it that long. And there's a few people like that. Beck Rawlings is another example. There's a lot of fighters in MMA, particularly MMA as a young sport, that haven't been doing it. But also, as an athletic person, I mean, take Bryant Jennings, for example, had a very competitive fight with Vladimir Klitschko just before Tyson Fury took the titles from him. And Bryant Jennings, I think, has only been boxing for like 5 or 6 years. And he's like 30-something. So, I just wouldn't worry about it, to be honest. If you're in shape and you want to learn, I would just go in there and dedicate yourself. And if it's not for you, I think you'll usually know it before the world tells you that you're not cut out for it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with training combat sports in my mind is, like, don't get ahead of yourself.
Right, exactly. Don't be like, well, can I be a world champion still? Like, just get in there and see if you're cut out for it.
See if it's fun, man.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's the big thing is, I don't think you should be training combat sports if you're not having fun doing it. Why? Because the costs on your body are so high compared to practically every other form of physical activity. Like, if you're doing Muay Thai regularly, if you're doing Jiu-Jitsu regularly, if you're wrestling regularly, you are going to be hurt on a regular basis. Not necessarily injured, but you're going to be hurt all the time. And that's a really, really high cost to have to pay if you're not having fun. And so I think you should do it as much and for as long as it's fun for you. And if you want to challenge yourself by taking a fight, I think as long as you're in contact with your coaches and you're making good decisions and you surround yourself with the right people, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that in your 30s. But you shouldn't be forcing yourself to do anything, and don't get ahead of yourself and sign up for a 2-year gym membership if you're not sure that you're not yet completely sold on that.
Yeah, if you're in shape and you want to try it, by all means try it, and then I think honestly you will have a feeling of your own potential within a matter of months. Better than we can say as outside observers. Just knowing whether or not you're cut out for it, if you enjoy it, if it feels right to you. But it is good to keep in mind, it's tough on the body. Even things like jiu-jitsu, like from the first day you get onto the mats and you shred all the skin off the top of your feet to the last day when you have arthritis in your fingers from gripping a gi, you will injure yourself no matter what the martial art is. You don't have to be punched in the head to be hurting yourself. It's going to hurt sometimes. So just know the toll that you might be taking on your body. You very likely will be taking on your body, and do it if it's fun anyway. Yeah, that sound about right?
Yeah, no disagreement with that at all. I mean, like, I'm just thinking about my own experiences. Like, I trained regularly for 5.5 years, and I loved it. And towards the end, I started to not enjoy it all that much. I'm taking time off right now. I think I'll probably go back to it at some point. But, it doesn't make sense to drag yourself to the gym. Like, this is, I think, you want to go run on a treadmill, you should do that just because it's a good thing. It's a good thing for your body, and you should do it. You should do it because that's better than dealing with like obesity related issues. Now,
I will say, I mean, you can drag yourself to the gym if you're confident enough to like stand up to your coach and say what you're willing to do. If you want to, because it's a good way to stay in shape, and you're like, I'm going to go there, I'm going to do drills, I'm going to hit the bags, and I'm going to run on the treadmill while everyone else spars, then by all means make that your way to stay in shape. But if you are not in the mood to get beat up, if you're not having fun getting beaten up and sparring, there is really no other reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like if you go to a jiu-jitsu class, you're not enjoying it. It's hard on your body. You hurt all the time. Like, don't put yourself through that.
Yeah, there's other ways to stay in shape if that's your main goal.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I was getting.
Sure, yeah, can't disagree there. Okay, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Brian Stann as much as we did. We'd love to have him back on the show sometime, so let us know what you thought of it. And otherwise, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.